I'm 25 years old, and until recently, I would have told you my life was fairly ordinary. I woke up each morning to the same view outside my window, the narrow street lined with uneven houses, some freshly painted, others crumbling at the edges. I worked at a small office a few blocks away, came home in the evenings, cooked my simple meals, and tried to live a quiet life. I wasn't the type who needed parties or grand adventures. For me, peace was the greatest luxury, and for a while I thought I had it. But then came the neighbors. At first, I didn't think much of it. A little music here, and there is normal. Everyone deserves some enjoyment after a long day, and I wasn't about to complain over a song or two echoing across the thin walls. But what started as occasional background noise quickly escalated into a relentless storm of sound that invaded every corner of my small home. Morning, evening, midnight, it didn't matter. The bass would throb through my walls. The lyrics screamed so loudly that I could almost recite songs I never wanted to hear in the first place. The worst part wasn't just the noise, but the way it stole from me. My sleep was shredded into restless fragments. Nights became endless as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, pillow pressed tightly over my ears, praying for quiet. In the mornings, I dragged myself out of bed with heavy eyes, my body begging for rest I couldn't give it. At work, my mind wandered, slow and foggy, and people began noticing I wasn't myself. I tried, of course. I wasn't unreasonable. I knocked on their door more than once, standing there awkwardly, explaining with as much patience as I could muster that the music was too loud, that I needed to sleep, that I had work in the morning. They would smile politely, nodding, promising to lower the volume. But as soon as the door shut, the thundering beat started up again, as if my request had been swallowed whole by the dark. Days turned into weeks, and my tolerance thinned to nothing. There's a special kind of frustration that comes when you feel powerless in your own home, when the place that should be your refuge becomes a battlefield of unwanted noise. I tried earplugs. I tried music of my own, even humming myself to sleep like a child, but nothing worked. The music always won. I started to dread the evenings, knowing what awaited me the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. Some nights, I'd sit on my bed in silence, waiting, hoping maybe they'd forget to turn on, only to feel the walls shake again with another burst of rhythm. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It felt like an intrusion into my very sanity. One night, after yet another failed attempt at reasoning with them, I sat at my desk with my head in my hands. My reflection in the darkened window stared back at me, tired and defeated. I realized then that I couldn't go on like this. I had reached my limit. That's when the idea came. The police. The thought made me uneasy at first. I had never been to a police station for anything in my life. I wasn't a troublemaker. I avoided conflict whenever possible. But as I weighed my options, I knew this was the only step left to take. If they wouldn't listen to me, perhaps they would listen to someone with authority. It wasn't just about sleep anymore. It was about reclaiming some sense of control over my life. The next morning, I barely touched my breakfast. My nerves were tight, my stomach churning as if warning me of the confrontation to come. I rehearsed my words over and over in my head. I just want some peace. I just want them to lower the music. Is that too much to ask? The police station wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk, but each step felt heavier than the last. The streets buzzed with normal life. Vendors shouting, cars honking, children chasing each other, but all of it faded against the thudding in my chest. By the time I reached the building, I could feel sweat at the back of my neck, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The station loomed ahead, an unremarkable block of concrete, its windows shaded, a few uniformed men moving in and out. I stopped outside the door for a long moment, gathering what courage I had left. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my shirt, telling myself this was the right thing, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. Finally, I pushed the door open. The air inside was different. Cooler, heavier, filled with a faint smell of ink, paper, and something metallic I couldn't place. Desks lined the room. Voices echoed in sharp tones, and for a moment I wondered what I had gotten myself into. My footsteps echoed softly against the floor as I moved forward, each one carrying me deeper into unfamiliar territory. I didn't know it then, but that single decision to walk through the doors of the police station was about to change everything. The moment I stepped into the police station, I felt like I had crossed an invisible boundary. Outside, the world had been loud and chaotic in its own way, but inside the station the noise carried a different weight. Clipped conversations, the rattle of typewriters, the shrill ring of a phone that never seemed to rest. Papers shuffled, boots clicked against the floor, and somewhere down the hall, a door slammed hard enough to echo through the building. I hesitated just past the entrance, uncertain where to go. A few officers glanced my way, their eyes moving over me quickly before turning to their work, as if I were nothing more than another tired civilian passing through. The walls were painted a pale, tired color that had long since lost its brightness, and fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a cold glow. I took a deep breath and approached the desk. My voice was small when I asked to file a complaint, and the officer behind the counter barely looked up. He gestured vaguely toward one of the side rooms, muttering that I should wait there. I did as told, my nerves prickling as I stepped into the narrow office. And that's where I saw him. He wasn't like the others, bustling about with stern expressions and heavy boots. He sat behind a wooden desk, his posture relaxed but commanding, as if the room naturally belonged to him. His uniform fit neatly, the badge on his chest glinting faintly under the harsh light. His eyes, though, those were what caught me. They were sharper than I expected. Yet there was something warm in them, a softness that contrasted with the rigid world he lived in. "Come in," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. I stepped forward, clutching the folded paper of my written complaint like it was a lifeline. My palms were damp, and I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the chaos outside the door. He leaned back slightly, studying me. "What brings you here?" I swallowed hard, my words tumbling out awkwardly. It's about my neighbors. They've been playing loud music for days. Weeks, actually. I tried asking them to stop, but nothing worked. I can't sleep, I can't focus. I need help. He took the paper from me, unfolding it slowly, his eyes scanning the lines I had scribbled the night before. For a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then he set the paper aside and looked directly at me. "That's tough," he said softly. "Noise like that, it eats away at you." I nodded, relieved he seemed to understand. "Exactly. I didn't want to cause trouble. I just want peace." He smiled faintly, though there was something else in it, something I couldn't place. "Peace," he repeated, almost as if he was trying to word out on his own tongue. His gaze lingered on me longer than I expected. The conversation should have ended there. He should have written down a report, given me a stamped copy, promised to send someone, and then waved me off like just another civilian. But instead, he leaned forward on the desk, resting his chin lightly on his hand. "You look tired," he said. The remark caught me off guard. I admitted. They keep me up half the night. "Not just tired from noise," he pressed, his voice dropping lower, more personal. "There's something else in your eyes, like you've been carrying more than just sleepless nights." I shifted uneasily in my chair. Why was he asking me this? Why did it matter to him? Yet there was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity, maybe even concern. I guess it's been hard," I said cautiously. "Living alone, working, deal with all this. It wears on you." He nodded as though he understood perfectly. "Loneliness does that. People think it's easy, but it isn't." I blinked. This wasn't what I expected. Officers were supposed to be stern, distant, focused on rules and procedures. But here he was, leaning closer, speaking like an old friend. "What about you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His smile deepened, though it held a shadow. "Long hours, endless complaints. People see the uniform, but they don't see the man wearing it. They don't see how empty the nights can get when you lock up and go home." His honesty startled me. For a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, as though we were cut off from the station outside. His words carried a weight, and I realized he wasn't just talking about himself. He was building a bridge between us, one brick at a time. "So," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine, "tell me about yourself. What do you do? What keeps you going?" I hesitated, unsure why he wanted to know. but something about the way he asked made it difficult to refuse. So I told him about my office job, about how I spent my days, how I tried to live simply. I even mentioned the little things I did to keep myself sane, like late-night reading or cooking meals that reminded me of home. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, but his gaze remained steady, as if every word I said mattered. No officer had ever looked at me this way before. "You have a gentle way about you," he said after a pause. "It's rare to meet someone like that here." I shifted again, my face warming. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean," he leaned closer still, his voice lower into almost a whisper. "People usually come here angry, desperate, shouting for justice. But you came here quietly, politely, just asking for peace. That tells me more about you than you realize." My chest tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had come here for help, for formality, for a solution to my noisy neighbors. Instead, I found myself under the steady gaze of a man who saw more than I wanted to show. Part of me wanted to retreat, to pull back into the safety of procedure and paperwork. But another part, smaller, quieter, felt drawn in, curious about this unexpected turn. He leaned back slightly, giving me a moment to breathe, but his eyes still held me. "Don't worry," he said finally. "I'll look into your neighbors. But for now, maybe you should just sit here with me a while. Talk. No rush." And there it was, the shift, so subtle yet so clear. He wasn't just an officer anymore. He was something else, someone else. I nodded slowly, though my thoughts were tangled. I had come seeking justice. But now I wasn't sure what I was leaving with. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You don't have to rush out," he said. "Sit. Take a breath. I can tell you've been running on empty for a while." Something about the way he said it disarmed me. I lowered myself in the chair again, my body stiff at first, unsure whether this was still part of official procedure or something else entirely. His office was small, cluttered with stacks of papers and old case files, yet felt strangely separate from a noisy world outside the door. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "You know," he began, "people think this job is about catching criminals or keeping order. But most of the time, it's just listening to people complain. Noise, neighbors, fights, bills. Sometimes it feels like the weight of an entire city gets dumped right here." I studied him carefully. He looked strong, the kind of man who could handle chaos without blinking. Yet his voice carried something fragile, something almost tired. "Doesn't it ever get too much?" I asked quietly. He chuckled, but it wasn't a joyful sound. "Every day. You listen, you nod, you write reports. People leave thinking their problems are solved, but sometimes you know nothing will really change. And then you go home to silence. Or worse, emptiness." His words lingered in the air. I had expected formality, rules, maybe even indifference. Instead, he was stripping away the uniform with every sentence, showing me the man beneath it. I didn't think officers talked like this. I admitted. "Most don't," he said, his eyes locking with mine. "Most keep the armor on. But sometimes," he paused, exhaling slowly, "sometimes it feels good to just speak as a human being, not as a badge." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to retreat, to remind myself that I was here only to file a complaint. But another part leaned forward, drawn to the honesty spilling from him. He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing. "Loneliness, that's the hardest part. You go home, the walls stare back at you, and you wonder if anyone really sees you anymore." Something stirred inside me. I knew that feeling, maybe not in the same way, but enough to understand. My nights have been haunted by sleeplessness, silence pressing against me, reminding me of the absence of companionship. "I get it," I said softly. "Living alone, sometimes you feel invisible, like you could vanish and no one would notice." His gaze sharpened, as if my words had reached a place he kept hidden. "Exactly," he whispered. "You said it better than I ever could." The silence between us shifted then, not empty, but full, thick with unspoken understanding. I felt a warmth rising in my chest, an unexpected sympathy for this man who, moments ago, had been nothing more than a uniform behind a desk. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. Tell me, do you ever feel like you're carrying everything by yourself? Like the world asks too much and gives too little? I nodded before I could stop myself. All the time. Some days, I wonder if I'll ever find balance. Between work, the noise, the isolation, it feels like drowning slowly. His eyes softened. You're not alone in that. The way he said it, low, deliberate, made my breath catch. We talked then, really talked. He told me about his years in the force, how he'd started with big dreams of making a difference, only to find bureaucracy and endless paperwork dulling the edges of his passion. He confessed how friendships had slipped away, how the job left little room for love or family. He spoke of nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if his life meant anything beyond this desk and these walls. In return, I shared pieces of myself I hadn't planned to, my struggles at work, the way I sometimes felt like a shadow in my own neighborhood, how the music blaring through the walls wasn't just noise, but a reminder of everything missing in my life, connection, comfort, someone to lean on. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the barrier between us dissolved. His laughter, when it came, was genuine and surprisingly warm, filling the little office with a brightness I hadn't expected. I found myself smiling back, forgetting I was sitting in a police station, forgetting why I had come in the first place. At one point, he opened a drawer and pulled out 2 cups, filling them from a small thermos on his desk. "Tea," he said, sliding one toward me. "Not the best, but it's what gets me through." I took a sip, and though it was bitter, I found myself murmuring, "It's not bad." His grin widened. "Yummy, right?" He teased lightly, echoing the playful word with a twinkle in his eyes. The word hung between us, oddly intimate, softening the heaviness of everything we had said before. I laughed, shaking my head, but the sound came easier than it had in weeks. Then came the moment, the one that changed everything. He set his cup down, his fingers drumming lightly against the desk as though he were searching for the right words. Finally, he looked at me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You know," he said slowly, I don't usually do this, but I like talking to you, more than I expected. You're not just another complaint in a file. You feel real." I froze, unsure how to respond. He leaned forward just slightly. "Stay a little longer. Not for the report, not for the music problem. Just for me. I could use the company." My heart stumbled in my chest. His tone wasn't commanding. It wasn't professional either. It was almost pleading, though wrapped in a gentleness that made me both confused and strangely flattered. I searched his face, looking for some hint of insincerity, but there was none. Just a man, lonely, tired, and for some reason, choosing me to fill the empty space. My voice faltered. "I don't know if I should." "Then don't think of it as should," he said softly. "Think of it as want. Do you want to?" The room felt too small, too quiet. My pulse thudded in my ears. I had come here desperate for peace from the noise outside my window, but now I was caught in a different kind of noise, one inside me, a tangle of doubt, curiosity, and something I couldn't yet name. And yet, despite all the confusion, I realized I didn't want to leave. "I can stay a little longer," I whispered at last. His smile was subtle, but I saw the relief flicker across his face. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." And just like that, the complaint about my neighbors faded into the background. What mattered now was this unexpected connection, this fragile thread weaving between 2 people who, only an hour ago, had been strangers. The hours slipped past without either of us noticing. What had begun as a complaint about noise had somehow turned into a quiet exchange of secrets and silences that felt heavier than words. The station outside his office door still buzzed with movement, boots echoing, papers shuffling, voices calling out names. But in here, it was as if time had slowed down. The officer leaned back, stretching his arms before glancing at me with a half-smile. "You must be hungry," he said. "I usually keep something around for nights like this." Before I could protest, he stood and rummaged through a small cabinet behind his desk. A moment later, he placed a tin of biscuits and another thermos on the table. He poured more tea, this time a bit of milk, and slid the cup toward me. You don't have to. I began. I want to, he interrupted gently. You've listened to me tonight. Least I can do is share what little I have. His words disarmed me again. I picked up one of the biscuits, brittle and slightly sweet, and took a small bite. It wasn't extraordinary, but in that moment, in that place, it felt oddly comforting. It's good, I murmured. He grinned, leaning forward like he was waiting for me to say it. I rolled my eyes but smiled despite myself. Fine. It's yummy. The laugh that followed was genuine, unguarded. It echoed through the office, warming the cold fluorescent light above us. Somehow, that silly word broke whatever invisible wall still stood between us. From then on, the conversation flowed even easier, like a river finally free of stones. We spoke about trivial things at first, favorite foods, childhood memories, the strange quirks of living in our neighborhood. He told me about the first time he wore the uniform, how proud his mother had been, how nervous he had felt standing so straight at the academy. I told him about the little cafe I used to visit after work, how I always ordered the same tea, because the owner would smile and say, "The usual?" But then the talk drifted deeper again, as if we couldn't help but peel back the layers. He spoke of the loneliness of long shifts, how sometimes he patrolled streets at midnight with nothing but the sound of his own footsteps for company. I confess that silence could be just as loud as noise when you were alone with it too long. We laughed at small jokes, fell quiet during heavier admissions, and every so often our eyes would meet for just a second too long before darting away. I kept reminding myself that this wasn't why I'd come here. I had walked through those doors out of frustration, clutching a complaint about loud music. Yet here I was, hours later, sharing tea and biscuits with a man who had turned from an officer into something far more human, far more complicated. At one point, he leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. You know, I didn't expect tonight to turn out like this. Usually people come in shouting. They drop their anger on my desk and leave. But you stayed. You listened. I shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to take the weight of his words. I didn't plan on staying this long. Neither did I, he admitted with a small laugh. But I'm glad you did. His honesty tugged at something inside me. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the tea. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, this kind of sincerity. Time wore on, the sound of the station thinning as the night deepened. One by one, the noises outside grew quieter. Officers leaving, doors closing, phone silencing. Eventually, it was just the two of us, the hum of the lights, and the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. He poured the last of the tea and sat back, his expression soft but unreadable. "It's late," he said finally. "Too late for you to be walking home alone." I hesitated, the logical part of me waking again. I should probably go. "You could," he said, his voice low, careful. "But you don't have to." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his eyes searching mine. "Stay here tonight, in the station. Not because you have to, because I'd like you to." The words landed heavier than I expected. He wasn't ordering, wasn't hinting at anything dark. He sounded almost vulnerable, like a man asking not to be left alone with the emptiness waiting outside his office. I didn't answer right away. My mind spun, tried to untangle the knot of emotions inside me. Was this inappropriate? Was it crossing a line? Or was it simply two people, two lonely people, finding comfort where they least expected? He must have seen the hesitation in my face, because he spoke again, softer this time. "I'm not asking for anything more than company. Just don't let the night swallow me whole. Not tonight." The quiet sincerity in his tone struck me harder than any demand could have. I looked around the room, the stacks of files, the chipped desk, the cold walls, and then back at him. Somehow, this sterile little office had become warmer than my own home felt in weeks. "I don't know why," I whispered, "but I don't want to leave either." Relief washed over his face, subtle but undeniable. He leaned back, exhaling slowly as if he'd been holding his breath. "Then stay," he said gently. "We'll talk until the morning comes. Or sit in silence. Either way, we won't be alone." And so I stayed. The night stretched on, but instead of dragging, it flowed. Soft laughter, quiet pauses, the occasional crunch of another biscuit share between us. At one point, he pulled out an old radio and tuned it until soft static-filled music played faintly in the background, far gentler than the noise I had been running from at home. I realized then that he wasn't just flirting. This wasn't a game, a passing moment of amusement. He was genuinely enjoying my presence, perhaps needing it more than I could have imagined. And in return, I found myself comforted in ways I hadn't known I needed. Somewhere between the quiet laughter and the heavy silences, a fragile bond had been sealed. Not official, not professional. Something far more human, something rare. And as the clock hands crawled closer to dawn, I knew that this night, this unexpected companionship, would linger with me far longer than the noise of my neighbors ever had. I never thought one simple complaint about loud music would lead me here. Sitting in a police station late at night, sipping half-warm tea with an officer who no longer felt like authority, but like a man stripped of his uniform shell. The station had grown quieter after midnight. The distant ringing of a phone had stopped, and the shuffle of boots on the tile floor had faded. It was just us in that room, me on the visitor's chair, him leaning slightly forward, elbows on the desk. The air felt heavy yet comforting, like the silence wasn't empty but full of unspoken words. I found myself replaying the events in my head. Just yesterday, I was frustrated, angry at my neighbors, exhausted from nights of pounding bass seeping through my walls. I had walked here determined to demand justice, nothing more. Yet here I was, not talking about noise complaints, but about loneliness, dreams, and heartaches. He broke the silence first. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes I feel like this job takes everything from me. My time, my peace, my chance at having something real." His voice cracked at the word real. That hit me. For years I had thought of police officers as tough, untouchable figures, stone-faced men who live by duty. But in that moment, his vulnerability was bare. "What do you mean by real?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, as if deciding whether to go on. Then he smiled sadly. "Someone who sees me as more than a uniform. Someone who understands I'm human, with flaws. I spend so much time solving others' problems that I don't even know who'd solve mine." His honesty disarmed me. I had expected formality, maybe a stern nod after I filed my complaint. Instead, he was peeling away layers, one after another, showing me a raw truth. And then, for the first time that night, I spoke about myself too. I get that. In my neighborhood, surrounded by noise, by people who don't listen, I felt invisible. Like my peace doesn't matter to anyone. I guess that's why I came here, hoping someone would care enough to listen. His gaze softened. "And I did listen," he said, "but maybe not just for your complaint. Maybe I needed to hear you." That statement made my chest tighten. A strange warmth spread inside me, mixing confusion with something dangerously close to admiration. Was this friendship? Something deeper? I couldn't name it, but it felt real, the very thing he had spoken about. We kept talking, about our childhoods, about regrets we carried like shadows, about tiny joys that kept us alive. He told me about missing family gatherings because of night shifts, about choosing duty over dreams. I told him about the mornings I woke up groggy from sleepless nights, dragging myself to work with resentment, yet still holding on to the belief that life had more to offer than routine and noise. At one point, I found myself laughing, a genuine laugh I hadn't let out in weeks. He had cracked a silly joke about his terrible cooking skills, and the way he acted it out with mock seriousness made me clutch my stomach. "You're impossible," I told him between laughs. "And yet you're still sitting here with me," he replied with a playful grin. That moment, simple, silly, filled with laughter, felt like a turning point. My heart didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt lighter, like someone had quietly lifted the weight I'd been carrying. When the laughter died down, I stared at him for a long moment. He wasn't just the officer I had met hours ago. He was a man who had quietly let me into his world, trusted me with pieces of himself most people would never see. And I realized I was doing the same. It scared me how fast a connection had formed. But it also thrilled me. "You know what happiness is for me?" he asked suddenly, leaning back in his chair. What? This. Right now. Just talking. No noise, no pretenses, no pretending to be stronger than I am. Just being. His eyes shone in the dim light, almost boyish, almost fragile. I swallowed hard, his words echoing in my mind. Happiness. Could it really be this simple? Sitting in a quiet room with someone who understood, who listened, who cared. For the first time in a long while, I thought maybe yes. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, at the way his shoulders had relaxed, at the faint smile tugging at his lips, at the relief in his eyes like he'd finally exhaled after holding his breath for too long. And that's when it hit me. Somewhere between my frustration with my neighbors and this strange night at the station, something had shifted. I wasn't here because of a complaint anymore. I was here because I wanted to be, because in this quiet corner of a noisy world, I had found connection I didn't know I needed. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch between us. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, alive, almost sacred. Inside me, realization bloomed slowly, tenderly. This man wasn't just an officer, and I wasn't just a visitor with complaint. We were two people, meeting at the crossroads of loneliness and finding, against all odds, a bond. A bond that felt like the beginning of something neither of us had expected, but both of us desperately needed. The first thing I noticed the next morning wasn't the sound of noise or the absence of it. It was warmth. A quiet warmth that wasn't from sunlight or blankets, but from a feeling deep inside. The kind that makes you breathe a little easier, makes your chest feel less heavy, makes the world seem less sharp. I sat up slowly, recalling the events of the night before. The late conversation, the laughter, the moment of truth exchanged between two people who, by all ordinary measures, should never cross paths so deeply. When I looked up, he was already standing by the desk, looking more composed in his freshly ironed uniform, but there was still a softness in his eyes. Not the cold, formal tone I expected from a man in authority, but the quiet expression of someone who had let me see his human side, and wasn't ashamed of it anymore. "Good morning," he said gently. "You slept well, I hope?" I smiled, nodding. Better than I have in weeks, actually. There was no need to explain why. The truth was obvious. Peace doesn't always come from silence, but from feeling seen, feeling understood. He sat across from me again, his movements calm, deliberate. "About your complaint," he began, shifting briefly back into the role of officer. "Don't worry. I'll handle it. The neighbors won't trouble you like that anymore. I promise." His words carried the weight of authority, but this time they also carried something else, care, a personal assurance that went beyond duty. "Thank you," I said softly, "but honestly, that's not the only thing I'll be leaving with." He tilted his head, slightly curious. I hesitated, then added, "Last night, I expected to be just another case file on your desk. But you made me feel like more than that. You listened. You made me realize how much a simple conversation can matter." A quiet smile tugged at his lips. "I should be thanking you. You reminded me I'm more than this uniform, that I'm still a person who can laugh, who can connect." He paused, his gaze steady, almost vulnerable again. "I hope this isn't the last time we talk. I'd like our bond to continue, if you'd allow it." Something fluttered in my chest at those words. Not romance exactly, but something tender, something rare. The idea that I mattered to someone I had met under such unlikely circumstances felt like a gift I hadn't even known to ask for. "I'd like that too," I admitted, smiling. "Very much." And with that, the unspoken was sealed between us. Not with a handshake, not with formality, but with the simplicity of two people who had discovered something worth holding on to. When I finally stepped outside, the morning air greeted me crisp and cool. The world looked a little different, lighter, brighter, as though the night's conversation had painted new colors on the canvas of my life. I walked with a smile I couldn't quite contain. I had gone to the station to chase quiet, but I left with something far better: companionship, understanding, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, sometimes even the most unlikely people, life plants little surprises to keep us going. As I made my way home, I thought back to his words, his laughter, the softness in his voice when he said he wanted our bond to continue. It struck me that sometimes the problems we think are burdens are simply doorways, guiding us toward connections we never would have found otherwise. That night, I discovered something far more important than silence. It wasn't just yummy, it was life giving me a sweet surprise.